Oh, can you hear me, Dave?
Okay,
Hi, everybody. We're just trying to get settled here. Thank you for coming, those of you who are in 3D. We have a number of people online. This is our first hybrid program actually in this year. And talking to the microphone, sorry. Okay. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all and introduce you to Mapping the Universe, a small feat that will be accomplished and finished today, this afternoon, by our august speakers, David Orr, the LA-based artist whose work you see around you, Professor David Kittay, who's a member of our board at Columbia University Religion Department, and Bob Thurman, zooming in from Woodstock, founder and president of Tibet House and internationally renowned scholar of Indo-Tibetan everything. Bob, thank you for coming. I know it's a big deal for a Saturday afternoon for people to come, and I hope you enjoy yourselves. Thanks so much.
Okay.
well, thank you, Beata. Thank you so much. And greetings, everyone, both physically present and online. It's good to see everyone. And it's so wonderful to be here in the midst of David's fantastic mandalas. And I just have a million questions about it. You know, I read a little bit about your background, and Bob, I read your wonderful introduction to the catalog. And so my first question to you, David, is how did you get into this?
It's a funny story. There's a place in England called Tintern Abbey, which is one of the churches that was burned down during the Reformation. And they left it standing. So when you're standing inside it, you're standing both inside and outside at the same time. And I had brought what I then had as a point and shoot camera to try and take pictures. And none of them were doing justice to what it felt like to be in that space. So I took a number of pictures and began collaging them together. And the more abstract the image, the more it felt like it felt to me to stand there. And that was really what started it.
Wait, you mean you were not an artist at that point?
I was not.
You were just taking some photographs?
Yes.
And yeah. This was how long ago?
God, 2004?
It's not that long ago. And now we look around and we look at all these fantastic things.
Thank you. It's evolved since then.
Yeah. No, I was wondering, Bob, you know, your introduction was so wonderful. And also what David has put together in terms of his thoughts about mandalas and quantum physics and just all the different religious traditions. Bob, what do you think? What about the mandala? What is this mandala?
Well, I think David's things are very inspiring in the sense that they give us this sense of the creativity and the orderliness of life, and that we are all mandalas, you know. And it reminds us when we see this that we can aspire to making things beautiful and essential. But the essential is to be happy, to make others happy. I think when people see these, they feel calm, they feel balanced, and they encourage one to sort of make one's own world like that. I think that's what's great about them as works of art, I think. To make that is the sort of order of life or something like that, you know. Life is good. L'chaim.
Well, thank you.
I feel that way when I look at them, and David has them on his website, where he David O. There are two Davids there, and all these wonderful symbols from all these cultures around the world, showing how all people have this feeling of being in the right place at the right time, to experience what is happening right now and being at peace in that situation, you know, and not needing to sort of invade anybody else, not needing to go anywhere else, just sort of really being balanced and where you should be and where it is good to be, something like that. That's
Yeah.
my feeling today.
Well, one thing that's interesting, you mentioned Ram Dass earlier, and the student that had been reading Ram Dass is sitting in the
Sitting
room,
right there.
sitting
Hi,
right
Jenna.
here. Yeah. Hi. And you know, the classic title of that work is Be Here Now. And I'm still learning how to be here now. I have to tell you, I feel that when I make these, I'm there then. And that's the time where I feel utterly present. But a lot of other times I am thinking about the future or the past, or, you know.
Sounds like the human condition to me. So David, though, when you make, how do you make these?
So I'll take a photograph of something and then multiply it. And with the text images, what I was really interested in was the textures of each edition and text. Some of the paper was over 1,000 years old. Some of the books were, you know, had been handled quite a bit, and therefore each one had a unique texture. So the first thing was to make a photograph that felt like it represented the qualities of that particular text or book. So if there was a beautiful fabric edge on the you know, on a corner that had worn away, I wanted to make sure that that was part of it. That one right there actually has that. You can see the little tufts at each point. And then others, I was really trying to work with the texture of the paper itself, and then also with color, because different papers become different colors over time, and different papers are also, as you know, dyed to be a certain color. So there's a Japanese sutra where they dyed it indigo and they painted gold over it, and so I wanted to make sure that I was capturing those qualities. And then I multiply them around the center axis, often by a number that is auspicious for the belief system being represented. And so, for instance, the Prajnaparamitra Sutra, I have 18 points, and they represent the 18 kinds of emptiness.
Wow.
So, and so on. Almost every tradition has 4. There's the 4 points. There's the 4 noble truths. There's the you know, north, south, east, west.
4 apostles.
It goes on and on.
Yeah.
And so I was very picky about which one I did 4 of. But I tried to find numbers that really were a little bit, you know, honestly suggested by the text itself.
Wow. Wow. So one thing that I noticed in your Illumin series, it's amazing all the different traditions that you have created mandalas from. There's the Divine Comedy, Dante's, Muhammad ascending into heaven, right? The Lotus Sutra, it goes on and on. Paramita, how, and the private instructions of Helena Blavatsky. How did you figure out how to work with each of these religious traditions? How are they different? Did they make you feel different?
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. I was fortunate enough to get a residency at a place called the Philosophical Research Society in Los Angeles that was founded by a guy named Manly Hall, who collected manuscripts. And he was one of the forerunners of comparative religion, who wanted to create a space where people could come and learn about any tradition without it being colored by ideology, an overarching ideology. And it's not surprising that Euston Smith ended up studying research, doing a lot of his research there, and became a board member, because it was very much that kind of approach. And so as a result, they have alchemical texts, they have theosophical texts, they have sutras, they have occult books, they have everything. And a large part of their alchemical texts actually ended up becoming donated to the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. But full disclosure, I was really interested in Buddhist texts at the time and went looking for a real sutra. I'd never seen one in real life. I'd only read them and seen photographs of them, but I wanted to see what a real sutra looked like. And so I went there looking for those, and then I started looking around the room and finding all these other things. And it was my way actually of kind of doing a deep dive into each belief system. And I don't pretend to be an authority, I'm still learning, but I really, you know, when I photographed a book about theosophy, I wanted to learn about theosophy. And, what the hell is a Rosicrucian anyway? That kind of stuff. And really to have an opportunity to get a little deeper into each. And that was, I chose them, the ones that I show, I'm trying to show a range. So it was important to show a piece of Islamic art, or an Islamic source, I should say.
Yeah.
It was also important for me there's a Francis Bacon first edition, and it was very important for me to show something that represented the birth of the scientific method, as well as spiritual ideas that really communicate light.
Wow. Wow. So the scientific method. Now, one of the things, I want to let everybody know that on David's website, he has this list of references that are useful for understanding his work. And so before today, I started going through them, and they're fantastic. I mean, there's that TED Talk. I forget who gave it.
Oh, Garrett Lisi.
Garrett Lisi, about the Lee 8E pattern. The Lee 8E pattern. Now, are you able to speak about that a little bit?
I can speak about it inarticulately, and I will. But
Good.
Garrett Lisi is one of those people who's a little bit of an outlier of the physics community, who is like a surfer, extreme sports guy who also happens to be, in my opinion, a bit of a genius. And he was encouraged by a fellow physicist to give this TED Talk, where he has broken down a system that shows the world in 8 dimensions, and not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, 8. And he has there's a few things in it that really struck me. One is that whenever you create an axis, if you find a particle, there will be a companion particle in a symmetrical distance away. And that's about as far as I can speak articulately about it, because I don't know how to create 8 dimensions. It makes a lot of sense in the TED Talk when you see the diagrams he creates. The visuals are great because they really show you, and they look like mandalas, actually. They look like mandala forms. It's an amazing talk.
And I wanted to ask Bob about this. Bob, in Tibetan art, often we see the sand mandalas or tankas of mandalas, which are in 2 dimensions.
Mhm.
And yet these are depicting mansions that are in 3 dimensions, or maybe more. Could you enlighten us about that?
Well, the mandala is, one mandala is the one that is offered, where you symbolically offer the whole universe to all enlightened beings. And then there it really is the whole environment. And one thing that is perhaps surprising to us, but in the Buddhist definition of a human being, we are our sense fields as well as our sense organs. In other words, we have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin for the 5 senses, and then our mind ranges everywhere, our 6th sense, our mental sense. And we think that we're just sort of a point of subjectivity inside an environment, like a room. I'm in a room, outdoors, the sun is shining, there's pine trees, I'm in the Catskill Mountains and so on. And I think those things are just all out there. But according to Buddhist science, the visual field around me and the audio field, hearing you, being with you guys online, although you're like 100 plus miles away, that's all part of me. So our sense fields and us are one thing. So, but we normally, since we don't think we controlled our environment, we're just sort of haplessly stuck here and there in it. We don't sort of take responsibility for it in a way. We don't feel that we are imagining it and engineering it. Although, in fact, when raw data come at us, we have to organize it with our concepts of what we expect it to be. And so, what a mandala is where you create an environment that you construct with sort of resonance with your own nervous system. So you perfect the environment so that you and the environment together are one harmonious being. So you can really be everywhere in the here and now. David O mentioned Ram Dass and being here now. And that, of course, that's the Buddha's moment in the manda under the tree. So a mandala is sort of creating things in a way where it is a perfectly excellent thing. And it's not only you and the inanimate environment, it's also you, and in that environment are other beings. And so it also incorporates the bigger ones, incorporate other beings in the same mandala with you. And it's a sort of thing where you're all equal, and each one is equally there, making the other one equally happy. And so it's it's like a Buddha world, something like that. So anyway, and the idea is that it creates a model so that we can make the whole world like that. So everybody will be equally happy in the whole world, and everyone will be able to resonate with the other being's happiness. The vibes will be mutually resonating in a positive way. So I think that's what it is. Manda means the essence, and the essence, of course, is life, joy, love. That's it, being in a moment, in a perfect place. And making a contribution that is perfect to that perfect place, namely a loving one. And the la means that which holds that or surrounds it. So that's the whole thing. One other thing that I thought of thinking of David's images, and that is we have this thing in tantric practice where you have a certain deity and a certain mansion and a building and all kinds of things in the building, and then you say the purification of it is this and this and this and that. And we tend to translate that as saying this symbolizes that. But the actual word in Tibetan is the purification of it. So it's like, you look at a wall, you look at a painting, and that painting is a symbol of the perfect balance of this moment. And but the word that they use for symbolization in this context, the Tibetans and the Indian Buddhists before them, is that the reality of the situation here is this situation of perfect balance. In other words, our body is a mandala. Our surrounding with other beings is a mandala. It's a perfect essential space. It's a perfect essential time. And everyone is vibing here in a positive way with everyone else. That's the idea. And so then it's called, we say the object, which seems one object among a bunch of others in an environment, but it symbolizes the purity of this moment. And the purity of this moment is that everything is actually perfect if we only knew the deeper reality of it. That's the idea. So I find David's work really inspiring because, Prajnaparamita Sutra is a long, lengthy text you can read, you can memorize, you can translate, you can think about the different sentences that mean different things, and that will be very beneficial to you. And he takes it all and he folds it all together, and every single syllable in it is the realization of freedom and joy and bliss, Freedom, bliss, freedom, bliss, indivisible. That's, I think, the fine. Detong yermepa in Tibetan. Shunya, sukha shunya advaya, sukha shunya advaya in Sanskrit. So that's my thought.
It's fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah. To go with Bob into David's mandala. This is fantastic. And David, I wonder when I want to make sure we have time for questions and comments from everybody who's kind enough to come. But when you go and you're engaging in your process, is it also a spiritual process for you?
It is.
And how do you feel?
I feel if I'm here now, I realize it when I realize that I didn't know where I was, if that makes any kind of sense. It's when you're reading, when you're looking at something and completely mesmerized by it, and you realize, oh, I've been standing here for 5 minutes, and I was just experiencing this. Or when you read an amazing passage in a book, or when you hear an amazing piece of music, or when you're you're physically doing something and it becomes a practice. And I have to say, the making of it is actually as close to spiritual as I can get in many ways. I began meditating, I started in 2009. I was taught Vedic, and then that opened a lot of doors. I really did it as a palliative thing at first, like so many, you know, and then I began to do a little more research, and some of my work brushed against ideas of impermanence and also interconnection. And that's something you can't help but think as you work with either ancient texts that you're creating a form out of, or a photograph of the moon that only looked that way for the split second you took the photograph, because it's constantly changing, and now you're taking that and arranging it. And there's something kind of blissful about repeating patterns and seeing how they work, and then refining that. And hours go by, and then suddenly you snap back.
It's a blissful experience, looking at one of these and going all the way in. And, you mentioned palliative, and also one thing that you mentioned is Carl Jung's influence on this, which has a lot of resonance with me, because along with D.T. Suzuki's essays in Zen Buddhism, it was The Secret of the Golden Flower and Carl Jung's introduction that really got me going and heading east. So could you talk a little bit about that? Because Jung talked about this deep psychological a journey to our collective unconscious.
Yes, I mean, the Secrets of the Golden Flower is my entry point. His introduction to the Secret of the Golden Flower is to alchemy what I feel like Robert Thurman's introduction to the Tibetan Book of the Dead is to Tibetan culture. You'll learn more from that introduction than you will from entire books written on the subject. And Jung had started to feel this sense of dread and would have dreams that the entire earth was bathed in blood. And a couple of years later, World War I broke out. And he said that he felt that he had tapped into this unconscious and this feeling that was, worldwide. And that was part of him developing the idea of the collective unconscious, which is obviously a huge form of interconnection. But in the Red Book, also, he began drawing mandalas, and that became, a huge part of the work, and a part of him working through that fear and working through that terror. Also trying to create something that would lead towards hope. He found it incredibly beneficial to his patients. And when he studied cultures, he found examples of the mandala in everyone he studied, be it indigenous, be it, alchemical, be it, any kind of culture. And if you look, I do a presentation, but where, from a Mayan sun disk to a particle diagram, it's always a circle with information radiating out from the center. And we still use it today in infographics. The lowly pie chart is a mandala. I mean, it's, it's information radiating out from the center, right? So, Jung's practice is fascinating to me also. And we were talking about this a little bit before we this started, in that both he and Sir Isaac Newton ended up spending the last chunk of their years studying alchemy, which I had no idea what alchemy really was when I first walked into the Philosophical Research Society. I had a sense. And it's interesting how many technologies came from alchemy. LCD technology was originally an alchemical experiment, where they realized they could get things to glow when they added charges. And a lot of the patents for a lot of visual technology are actually held by chemical firms, because they started as alchemical processes. Dr. David Braffman at the Getty does an amazing talk about this, where you just can't, it sounds like science fiction. Yeah. But it's also fascinating to me that two forces who really redefined the way that we view the world, one in classical physics and one in terms of taking a very different tack to investigating the self, both ended up studying something that was considered to be esoteric or occult. It has some moments of that obviously brushes against the rational quite a bit. But I found that uncanny as well.
I wonder, Jung wrote in that introduction, he wrote that it's sometimes can be dangerous for people to just plunge themselves from their usual conscious way of living into the collective and unconscious. And he wrote, he said, he's talking about the way of development using the mandala. And he said, this way of development has scarcely any meaning before the middle of life, normally between the ages of 35 and 40. In fact, if entered upon too soon, it can be injurious. And is that when you discovered this, David?
It isn't. I mean, but it makes sense. I discovered this sort of in my mid 40s, late 40s.
Yeah.
But it was definitely after middle age. I was one of those people, I didn't want to start in our practice until I had something to say. And I was, part of it was vanity. I was terrified of, tripping over my own feet. And some of it was, I really wanted to have a little life under my belt before coming out with work. And I always loved what Louis Bourgeois said about, I don't want to clutter the conversation. I want to add to it. And I was like, that's how you should hopefully aspire to be with work.
I wonder about that, Bob. One thing that always struck me was that Confucius reportedly said that until he was 30 years old, he didn't even know where to stand. and so I wonder in terms of appreciation of this art and the mandala, in terms of looking at what Newton did and what Jung did when he got older. He started making sand castles on the beach, right? He wanted to really walk the walk that he had been talking. What do you think, Bob, in terms of the age at which and place in life when people get taken with spirituality? Can you generalize about that?
Yeah, I think, well, I was talking to someone today about something, and I remembered how lucky I was to lose my eye at the age of 20. I had this accident, which wasn't very spectacular otherwise, but I did lose my left eye. And so suddenly I had a midlife crisis. But I was lucky to have it at 20, because at 20 I could still learn things. I could learn where to stand, I could learn, because Confucius was right, I think, about knowing where to stand, his way of growing up and his context of growing up. And we do discover that we didn't know what we were doing when we were younger quite often. But when we're lucky, we realize that without knowing it, we were still doing something worthwhile. But I'm so delighted that I'm so pleased that I was able to have a midlife crisis before it was too late. Because I think a lot of times when you're at the time when you're ready to write Dante Alighieri's thing about what I was in the middle of life, I was walking in a dark forest and things seemed meaningless and what to do and so on, this kind of thing. And he was lucky he met Virgil, who dragged him all over purgatory and everywhere. But and he wrote his wonderful thing, But it's I think it can happen to people at any time, and people can find their way at any time. And I actually think nowadays, young people are thrown into such a strange world because of the huge Niagara avalanche of information that is flooding everybody in every direction, in every culture, everywhere on the planet. And therefore, they have to grow. They don't have time to sort of play and have the play of childhood in a way. They have to grow up really instantaneously and bring youthful anxiety. Terrible statistics about teenage suicide and young people killing themselves and so on because of the weight of that, not feeling protected by the elders. And but in a way, so the time thing is changed now. And on the other hand, I think that the young beings who choose this planet at this time and come and find parents and get born, I think they're kind of macho and ready to go, actually. So I have a positive sense about them, the young ones.
Yeah.
But what about David, you and your grandchild? I'm David K. I'm talking. I don't know.
Yeah.
David.
I was just thinking.
You have these supernal grandchildren who are really like walking Buddhas.
Yeah, there's something.
And your job now is not to spoil them, of course. because I
Yeah,
guess
no,
you
that's
could
their
spoil a
parents'
Buddha.
job. Yeah, that's their parents' job. Okay. So, but I was thinking in terms of the exactly what you were saying, Bob, in terms of the plethora of information, bombardment with information. And then I was looking at these mandalas, which we're surrounded by, which David has put together. And in particular, I think those of you who are online, I think the only ones you can probably see this just as an example.
Yeah, is that the Prajnaparamita one, David? Which one is that? What's the name of it?
The Ambeka Alankaraya.
And
Okay.
yes, and so what I was thinking about the therapeutic use of these mandalas, because in a way, if you look at it, it draws you to the center, and yet there's a plethora of information, right, beaming
Mm-hmm.
out from the center, surrounding it, and yet you can look at this mandala, engage with this mandala, and be drawn into the center where it's quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, if this your particular form of art right now is coming at a time when the world really needs it.
Oh, that's a very nice compliment.
Yeah, I was thinking that, you mean Mbeka Alankaraya.
Yep.
Yes, I just see that now on your website. Illumined, colon, the Mbeka Alankaraya. What culture does that come from, David?
Sinhalese.
Sinhalese.
Yes.
Ah.
It came from I can never pronounce his last name. Kumsumari, Ananda Kumsumari. It came from his collection.
Uh-huh.
And it's a group of Sinhalese manuscripts bound together in a leather folder.
Yes, well, that's the eightfold wheel of teaching inside the center, sort of, isn't it? Is that a symbol of the purification of that is the eightfold path, the eight spokes, or is that I can't see it clearly. No, that's a square mandala in there. Then there are 8 petals of that central thing there. That's amazing when you go deeper in. Actually, David, you know what I wanted to say about it, David K., is in Tibetan there is something called Tongdrel. There's Turdrel, the Bardo Turdrel, the Book of Natural Liberation in the Between. Is the title in Tibetan is Turdrel. Just from hearing it, you're liberated. But they also have things that are called Tongdrel. Just from seeing it, you are liberated. For example, if you can you see behind me? On the screen behind me.
Yes, we can see it.
You see the little face there behind me, the little photograph I have? That is that is a picture of Maitreya, the future Buddha, a photograph of the sculpture that is in the Dalai Lama residence in Tibet, where, of course, Dalai Lama's not there. It's like a museum now. And it didn't get destroyed because they had grain piled up in front of it that made it look like a storage room. So they didn't see it was an image. They didn't destroy it, when they were doing their cultural destruction, And supposedly, just seeing that, you feel liberated. Tongdrel. If you can see it in a be here now mode, it will liberate you from suffering into freedom. So I was thinking your mandalas, therefore, are Tongdrels. If I was writing an introduction today, I would say these are Tongdrel mandalas, like the one behind David K's head. That's the one that we see, the online people see. That is the scripture of the wonderful Theravada Buddhism, or some scriptures folded into this incredible thing in David's artistic vision, David O's artistic vision, and then it becomes something you can enter and you can go inside there. And I can't make it go big like I can online. It's on David's website. And you can go in and there's a wonderful free space in there. Amazing place that's luminous and quiet, but also inspiring and bliss-producing. Wonderful, with eight different sort of spokes to it, which is probably the eightfold path, the way to live. Not just the way to stand, but actually the way to be and the way to live. Oh, it's just wonderful. So
and then I also wonder Bob, about the relationship between the Tongdrol and the Todrol, and between the seeing and the hearing, because I don't know about all of you out there. When I look at these different mandalas, I hear different sounds.
Oh,
And I don't mean because I have synesthesia. I mean that they conjure up in me different sounds. You know, one of them, that the moon mandala that you had that we looked at before, it conjures up such deep om. And so I wonder, you know, David, when you're creating these, do you also experience things with your other senses other than your visual sense?
I do. I'm a huge Bach fan. And if anyone had told me when I was younger that Baroque would be the music that I would gravitate towards, I would have laughed. But that is the music that I really love. And there is a circularity to it. There's an intricacy to it. And I actually don't listen to music while I work, because sometimes if the music's great, the work
Yeah.
seems wonderful. And then without the music, they're like, well, okay, next. But I hear it in my head, that kind of
Yeah.
a thing. And actually, one of the best compliments I got about the moon mandalas was from a friend who's actually here, who said, you know, it looks like Bach sounds. And I'm, you know, that was terrific.
Wow.
And sounds fascinating too. You know, the idea of cymatics, that if you put sand on a piece of metal and run a vibration through it, it will form a symmetrical pattern. There's some links to that on my website as well. The whole idea that the universe resonates in B flat, 57 octaves below middle C. Yeah, and maybe that's Om.
Yeah.
I mean, or an after effect of Om, or, you know,
Do we have anyone with natural tone ability who can sing us a B flat right now?
I was like,
That would be great.
David
That'd be great. And by the way, look, as we go along, is the thing as B flat? That's good. B flat. That might not be B flat. So,
Can you
so
sing
but as
that,
we go
David?
along, let's make this participatory, because, you know, a lot of you are sitting out there, you know, just know about this. You're all here, and you know, I want to know what Michael McCormick thinks about all this too, and so let's hear from you at any time as we talk. So just, you know, put up your hand and participate. That's just fine. Okay, so yeah, so as you are going into this marvelous world, you are hearing a little Bach,
I am.
a little Bach.
And singing bowls. I love those tones. You know, that whole. I love, if you've ever heard a really good recording of a singing bowl when someone strikes it. Sometimes when on websites where they're selling them, they'll go, and the clip is a few minutes long.
Yeah.
Because the tone is constantly shifting and shifting and shifting and shifting. And honestly, you can begin to visualize different forms occurring as it's evolving. And it's getting quieter, but it's also, in some ways, it's getting more complex. In some ways, it's getting more simple. There's a lot of,
you know, and this goes to what Bob was saying about the mandala, how in a way everything is a mandala, but with your mandalas, we start to train. And so actually, as I was walking around the room and looking at these, then I was by the window and I looked outside and I said to myself, well, you know, the whole block is a mandala, isn't it? You know, isn't it?
I love that idea. And there's that great quote from Black Elk: wherever you stand is the center of the circle, the bounds of which you do not know. And I think that's a great, you know, I think about that a lot, actually.
Yeah. Now what about all this business with quantum mechanics? You know, I think as we were talking before, we just started, you know, like a half hour before everybody came. We were having the greatest conversation. But you know, we're both kind of obsessed with it in an amateur kind of way, which I know in my case is when I speak to a physicist, they kind of look at me and, you know, laugh. But how does this play in to your thinking about art and spirituality?
Well, I would say the first thing is honestly the idea of interconnection. The idea in quantum physics that at some level, everything's the same stuff and that everything is a different manifestation of the same stuff, which is a very Buddhist idea. I also, just a quick interjection, one of the things that made me interested in Buddhism and made me respect it immediately was, the Dalai Lama's position, where, people asked him, well, what if science proves you wrong? And his response was, then I'm wrong, which is a very different reaction than Christianity had, for instance, when confronted with evidence that might have refuted their ideas. So that is one element that I think about quite a bit. I also think about Indra's net and how everything is a reflection of another thing, and it just multiplies endlessly. And I feel, I can't help but think when people talk about dark matter or dark energy, we only perceive 5% of the universe. That's all we perceive. The rest is dark energy and dark matter. And scientists call it that because they don't know what the hell it is. And so, right?
That's right.
Well, and I like your remark, Bob, where you famously said nothing is nothing.
That's right. That's
right.
I think those are the kinds of things that I think about.
And if everything is illusion, then illusion is an illusion.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we were talking about the ocean and the waves.
Right. And yeah, and that's actually a lot of these mandalas, that is actually the idea behind them, which is with the spiritual text in particular, I don't think any belief system necessarily has the full description or understanding of truth. I believe it lies beyond language, certainly, which is why I think meditation can be so important. And so what I wanted to do is create these forms that there's beauty in these traditions, there's complexity in these traditions, they're like cathedrals of thought, but they're an overlay. And I do believe that where science, art, and philosophy overlap, that may be where truth lies. Scientists used to be called natural philosophers, right? So those elements, play into it. And so I feel like each one is, it was once described to me when I was trying to understand the idea, well, if everything's everything, how can I be me, And they're like, well, there is no you. And I'm like, well, there kind of is. And so they described it as, if there's an ocean and there's a wave, that's, that wave is you. And you're part of everything else, but you're also a specific thing. And then you said, what if the ocean is a series of waves?
Yeah, it's waves all the way up and all the way down. But, David, I love, you have like Bob has this sense of optimism and delight in what there is. And, we see that in your art and we hear that from Bob whenever he speaks. And this is what we need today.
Well, thank you.
So really, as I look at this, I think to myself, how can we get this out there, into our culture? What's the way to do that? How can we get, Putin to spend his time, looking at mandalas rather than, plotting this or that? How can we do that?
There's glimmers of it, though. When Bob Thurman was talking about younger people coming up and being of this time, Greta Thunberg is of this time.
Mm-hmm.
She was born to be here now,
Mm-hmm.
And so there's moments like that. And there's also moments like Amanda Gorman's amazing performance at the inauguration, where light was flying out of her, right?
Yeah.
And, it almost didn't matter. Her words were lovely and powerful, but it almost didn't matter what she said. She had this presence that was, and, for the next 2 months, everybody was talking about poetry. How great was that? Especially after what we've been through with everything else. And poor Joe Biden was given a broom and said, you fix it,
Right.
But I do feel like there's sparks of it. And I think they can be harder to find, certainly, for me anyway. And I guess that's partly why I create my own. You know,
Yeah.
the moon started as a way of, I was gifted a telescope for my birthday, and I started photographing the moon. And I had been sending out flowers every Friday, Flora for Friday, to sort of cheer up friends and stuff. And then with the moons, I started sending out mandalas for Monday. And it was a way of challenging myself to create something that was good enough to send out into the world, but it was also to send a little bit of light out.
Well, Bob, I'm thinking, while we got you,
Yeah.
could you talk a little bit about the moon in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, both exoteric and esoteric,
Yes,
to give
sure.
us more mystique?
I know. I just learned this most amazing thing reading the late Edward Henning's book on the Kalachakra mandala, and about how the moon is associated in the Buddhist esoteric thing with the male and the sun with the female. Very often people think the sun is the male because it's burning hot, and the moon is the pale female. In male chauvinist cultures, they always think that sun is male, sun is the king, and I'm a Leo. I'm a Leo, so I'm sure I've been guilty of that much in my life. But actually, the moon, the moon is associated with semen and so on, and the sort of the vital element in fertility of the male is white. It's semen, and then the female is the red blood, and makes the egg. And then I just learned this incredible thing that in the Buddhist view of conception and birth, that the male comes with 32 elements, which are the 32 vowels of the Sanskrit alphabet. And the female holds the 80 consonants in the red color, which are and it's the meeting of the 32 with the 80. And the 80 fold themselves around the 32, which are the vowels. They organize the vowels like that. And then that then is the engine of living, mammalian living cells, biology, life, And I never really, we know that from the, in the esoteric, where you create, sun and moon sort of mixed together, you have a pink moon, etc. Different ways of visualizing the rising of the deity, and you're in the mandala when you inhabit a mandala, in the esoteric practice. But the idea that they say, of course, that the consonants are female and the vowels are male, often, although it can move around because it's a purification, it's a symbol.
Have you seen any artistic? Have you seen any artistic representations, Bob or Michael or David or anyone else, where the consonants and the vowels are embracing? I'm thinking David might make that into a mandala. I'm thinking about your mandalas where you have the scriptures, and you have the actual scriptures, and they're folded, and this gives an incredible sense of the embrace of language and sound together with space and visualization. So I'm wondering, are there anybody familiar with any artistic representations of the vowels and consonants embracing each other? God knows what that would give birth to. But
I think that David's Prajnaparamita mandala, and even this one, the one behind you, because remember, that's a scripture behind you, a bunch of scriptures which have letters and so on, and they have vowels and consonants. The Pali language is very similar to Sanskrit. Really, it's more like a colloquial Sanskrit, and so the vowel and consonant, they shape it in a form where, at our sort of level of magnification of an ordinary human being, we can speak and have language. We can talk to each other somewhat imperfectly. We don't really fully get what the other one really says, but it's enough to give us a vector of the sort of reality of it all. And so I think David's thing, where he takes those actual words, linear sentences, and paper on which it's written, and ink with which it's written, and so forth, and then the encoding the labor of the scribe who wrote it, and then the person who spoke it, and the guy who dictated and wrote it down, blah, blah, blah. And he takes that and he folds them into their essential mandalaic essence, and then it's all there in a perfect balance, beyond what could be expressed in any linear matter, which would just be going around it, kind of, going around the circumference of it. And so his thing, that's why they are tongdrel, that's why they liberate you when you see them, because you sort of go right into the center. And in the center, instead of finding either nothing or being sent out of the universe into some fantasy of an absolute being that controls everything and you're subordinate to, instead of that, you find yourself in the center where it just unfolds. And you're there. It's like the absoluteness of the relativity. That's what the emptiness is. It's not a nothing. It's not an open. It's not a nothing. It's the absoluteness of being right there. And then the art that expresses it is pure love. It's pure, make the person have it all right then and there. It's all fine. And this is a big difference. We are not only we, but in my last book, and always constantly, I always come back to this idea that when you said how to get out in the culture, the key thing to get out, the key thing that would have saved Mr. Putin from having to execute a 20th century, so 20th century KGB vision of conquering everybody. Instead of that, the idea that the empire of love and light is right there. It's right in the building he sits in, that weird ice cream cone. It's like building. It's much hipper than our White House, which is a white racist symbol of the planter owners, like residents. But that's a multicolored, like ice cream cone. The Kremlin is really a beautiful building, and he had it all. He didn't have to conquer anybody. And then he just destroys himself by going out and acting in 20th century manner in the 21st century thing. So I'm saying that David's mandala is what these tongdrels, you have it all right now. You don't have to worry about another thing. Reality is good. Death is not a problem. It's just an entry into a bigger mandala. And there's no bad guy outside. There's no mean God's going to send you to hell just because you jerked off once in your life or something, whatever they think, those weird people. and it's perfect. And this shows this perfection, It's all there. Vowels and consonants, the whole thing. Beyond what they could express in a linear manner, but all there. Whereas we're conditioned, and Indian people and Chinese people, Japanese people too, Russian people, they're all conditioned by the wrong kind of boss, kings and queens, to think that life is dangerous, nature is bad, nature is red in tooth and claw, the tiger's going to eat you, the Ukrainians will get you, the Nazis will find you, etc., etc. It's all bad, so therefore you can be bad to protect yourself. And then you're trapped and you're in prison. And so the idea that reality is bad and dangerous and you should try to hide from it or escape from it, that is what conventional cultures have wrongly been teaching everybody for so long. And Buddha's whole thing, which is just the enlightened scientists, it's not a religion, is to try to help show people that life is good. And even death is not really a problem if you love. If love carry you through it. And you'll have better life, more life, that's all. It's just a change of the body, Like His Holiness told a little girl in Warsaw, in the VIP lounge at Warsaw Airport, some 20 years ago or something. Some little girl and a group of kids, who had done a folk dance in Polish, those blouses that they wear with the little red flowers embroidered on them, in Eastern Europe. They're very popular in Romania and Poland, things like that. And the little girl, one of the girls, like 12-year-old or something, she says to him, "Oh, Your Holiness is so we were so glad to dance. We're glad you liked it. And by the way, isn't it awfully hard for you to be reincarnated? Isn't that really difficult? You have to get a new body and you whatever reincarnate." He said, "Oh no, it's easy. It's so nice. It's quite nice." He said, to her. He said, it's just like if you get a new dress like that with the nice flowers and the embroidery. Your old one got worn out, So you just get a nice new dress and put on the new dress. Isn't that? And it'll be really nice. It's really great. And she said, oh, that's awfully nice. And in our cultures, you don't talk about death with the young kids. Oh, no, you hide that. Oh, scary, scary. Not at all. And
Well, you're talking about the dress,
kids.
and I'm looking at the mandalas, and
Yeah.
and looking at the mandalas, so you could imagine a little girl spinning in a beautiful dress.
That's
Look at it
right.
from the
That's
top.
good.
Oh,
You got
no,
it.
we have a question from the audience or a comment. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Oh, that's a good idea. Hold on a second.
I can't hear
Hey,
it.
Jem will bring you a mic.
Thank you. I was just going to say, it's a beautiful feeling from all your
I love the
mandalas,
Mbeka,
and
David, by the way.
I've always loved
David,
seeing
while we're
them.
waiting for the mic.
They're so satisfying and so sort of
Oh, okay.
they're so sort of satisfying and kind of perfect in a lot of ways. Like there's a symmetry that's so gratifying and satisfying when you. But I'm wondering, I always think when I see them, I always wonder about your process in creating them, and I wonder, does it ever not work? Like, do you ever like what makes it not work? And is there anything that makes it something where you go, oh, well, I'm gonna push this aside and try something different?
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't work in a spectacular fashion. I would say actually many of them, when they get too perfect, they don't work. It's very odd that way. The moons actually respond really well to being patterned and stuff, because really you're repeating the same shape over and over again. And so there's a kind of precision there that's really rewarding. When it's something more organic form, with like a book page or something, you need to be careful with how you move it around. And it's going to sound silly, but honestly, a lot of times, first of all, when I start the process, I have no idea what it's really going to look like. I may have an idea that I think what might happen, but a lot of times I'm surprised by the ones that come out even better than I thought or different than I thought. And honestly, most of those are on the wall. The other thing is that I feel like, particularly with books, it tells you how to repeat it and tells you how to create the form. And so a lot of times, that's why I said earlier, it's very important that the original photograph from which I make the shape is a good one and represents the object, because I found if it doesn't, it's going to tank. And if it does, if it captures what's unique about the object, then the repetition and the shape actually will reflect that, if you'll forgive the expression. And the other answer to that question is, honestly, when they need to have a certain level of complexity, but that feels like it goes away if you look at it, if that makes sense, so that it can have a lot of intricacy and a lot of balance going on. And obviously it's all symmetry and, using the Fibonacci sequence to create spirals and things like that, a lot of forms from nature. I'm fascinated by that, a snowflake can reproduce at a different size, as a visual manifestation, and a snail and a cyclone are the same shape, that kind of stuff. It is kind of uncanny. But there needs to be, enough complexity that it actually, you tune it out and just focus center. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Okay.
Dave, can I ask you, David, something? This Paramita mandala, which I presume somewhere there on the wall, but I'm looking at it on your website, and I'm magnifying and looking in toward the center of it. And these petals that you have, the 9 petals, the different patterns of 9 petals, almost look like a fabric, like a sewn fabric. And they have these amazing yellow and blue and mauve and purple and orange. They remind me of the colors of Paolo Uccello's painting. I always love Paolo Uccello because he uses these kind of colors. But what is the original thing? Was this a text? Was this a fabric, or what was it that then you multiply into this amazing thing? And of course, there's a white layer also
Right.
that comes out of the center. So how did you find that in specific?
Well, that's a great one, because that sutra, as you know, sutras come with two planks of wood and the text in between. And when it's an auspicious sutra, they actually, in this case, they had layered robes from monks, 5 robes for the 5 Tagatas.
Ah,
And so I actually, to represent that particular sutra, I photographed the robes that were on the cover. I held them off to the side and created the form from that. And that's a great example of where the texture that it created,
I see.
sort of told me how to represent it. And I was really, I didn't realize when I first started this project that some sutras are really collections of other sutras.
Mm-hmm.
And so that became very complex, because if it's a sutra, like the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, is the phrase everyone knows. And you can kind of think about how you're going to render that. But with the Prajnaparamita, it's got a ton of different scriptures as part of it. And so the thing I hung my hat on was the 18 emptinesses. That's why there's 18 nodes to it. But I needed something that was really non-specific, actually, to create that feeling. And when you mentioned that the hearing of a certain sutra or the reading of it can already be an act of purification, I was thinking about that with visuals. I was thinking, I've always thought that certain objects might be sentient, and so I wonder, maybe my toothbrush takes a dim view of me. I don't know, but I do think that objects have a certain resonance. And so I wanted to make the visual reflect that there was a resonance coming out of it.
It came out really well. Thank you so much. Really beautiful.
Thank you.
It's magnificent. Wow. I wanted to ask you also, another part of the exhibit we have here at Tibet House are the skulls. And what you do with skulls is quite remarkable. It's not just the skulls as you find them. Could you talk about your skull?
Well, it goes to the question about symmetry, actually. We love symmetry because we are ourselves symmetrical. We look for it in the world. And in terms of people, the more symmetrical your features, the more likely you're going to be chosen as a sexual partner, the more trustworthy you're going to be perceived to be, the more money you'll earn over a lifetime. And so I started taking photographs of friends and mirroring right down the center to create perfect, and it looked bizarre. You could tell immediately. And even when someone has a fairly symmetrical face, there's a lot of asymmetry going on.
Right, we're in the uncanny valley.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Totally the uncanny valley. However, with skulls, we don't see them all the time. And there's such an icon that I began to just mirror skulls across the center line. And it was surprising how many people who actually work with them all the time didn't notice at first. But once you look for it, it seems pretty obvious, but some folks wouldn't. And we're like, which one's that? And I photographed a number of them at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, which is a pathology museum. And so there they have a huge collection of skulls created by Joseph Hurtle to debunk phrenology, to show that, the larger the head, not necessarily the bigger the brain, to put it bluntly. And but he had a wide range, and of course the ones that they were most interested in were the ones that were malformed or distorted, because they're a pathology museum. And then I would photograph it and repeat it and make it perfect again. And so that was a really an interesting way. And that was actually my first true experience where I realized I was making a mandala, even though in some ways they don't have the many rays of symmetry. And they have a center point, but it's not, perfectly symmetrical. But, it is the seat of thought. It's where we build our model of reality. Bob was talking earlier about how we all take in sensory information and create a model out of it. And it's out of date. It takes a while for light to go from the object to us. It's subjective, obviously. If you've ever been in a situation where you're about to have an accident or something startles you, you'll notice that your peripheral vision goes dark. Your central vision gets very, very sharp, and it's almost like watching super slow motion.
Right.
You know, time slows. Everybody says that when they have an accident, and that's what's going on. Your body's reacting.
By the way, that's a function of memory.
Is it really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I just tell you,
please.
when I was, I was at Burning Man, one time, and in our camp was the neuroscientist David Eagleman, who's also a great writer. He wrote this amazing book of short stories called Tales from the Afterlife. But anyway, so we were just talking, and David says, yeah, I was wondering about if time slows down and you think you're going to die. And he said, yeah. So I got a whole bunch of people and I put them at the top of a huge water tower, and I had them wear a watch that was flashing at a certain rate that at our time, they would not be able to perceive it. But if time actually slowed down, they'd be able to see the digits on the watch. And then someone would push them off of the tower and they'd fall and they'd be looking at the watch. And in fact, nobody could see it. And so he concluded that slowing down of time was a retrospective event of memory. That's how we recall it. It just shows how things are so much not the way they seem. Even when you mention that we're not seeing things as they appear, there's a time gap.
Right.
And then of course, when you get into quantum mechanics and everything appearing in the way it is measured, and then what is the measuring device? And when we look at things through the measuring device of approaching a mandala, it can do incredible things for our perception of the rest of the world. But go ahead, you were talking about skulls, sorry.
No,
and memory slowing
this
down.
This is great. Well,
yeah.
And actually, I'll just follow up your idea of the memory of that being memory, in that I remember I hit a deer once and time slowed. And I thought afterwards, if my body was that focused, why wasn't I able to avert hitting this animal?
Right.
Because I was hyper aware.
Right. And everything seemed like it slowed down.
It seemed like it slowed down, but it didn't really. It was my recording of it that I'm playing back. But that's interesting.
Yeah.
So skulls are also interesting in that, in the Tibetan tradition, of course, there's the Kapala, where you drink from a skull cup to remind you of impermanence. Linguistically, Nagin originally meant cup. There's a lot of roots that describe a skull as a container or a cup, which it's not that big a stretch if you stop and think about it. But I called the series Perfect Vessels because, they're perfectly symmetrical. And then obviously I'm thinking of them as containers or, something that energy manifests through. And it was interesting also to do that project, because people think that all skulls look alike, but they don't. Each one's like a thumbprint. Everyone is completely unique. And I actually, even though they're mirrored, I did a video where they morph from one to next, so you can see how the shape changes. It's pretty dramatic. One of those is in the show, actually.
Oh, you mean the video?
Just everything.
That would be a cool video. The video where they morph.
No, the video's here. Yeah.
The video's I didn't see that.
Yeah. And so, and I originally created to emphasize how different each skull does look.
Wow. And here we have a whole bunch of skulls.
Yes.
Here. Do any of the skulls have anything they'd like to ask the artist here? Anyone? Yes, Jenna. Jenna is also an artist. She does wonderful things. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yes, a lot of the traditions that you've been pulling from have these themes of non-attachment. And we were talking about be here now, and that's kind of the opposite of attachment. So I guess I'm wondering, what is your relationship to your own attachment to both your work and your role as the artist, the creator that made this work?
I would say I do believe that you uncover something rather than create it. And what I mean by that is There's a journalist, Lisa Robinson, who interviewed pretty much all musicians from the 1960s on, and everyone said, when she was asked, how did you write that song? Everyone said, I found it. And they may have said it in different ways, but everyone, and I actually do believe that that's true. I feel like you're accessing something. And it relates to the question before about how do you know when it's done, or how do you, feel with the complexity? And it kind of tells you, as you know, if you create things, there's a moment where you realize it's finished. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to learn as an artist, is when is it done? We've seen a lot that's been overthought, and we've seen a lot that's been underthought. And finding that sweet spot is really important. So I guess I feel myself a bit as a conduit. And I would say being attached to the work, it's a very hard question to answer. I will say that sometimes when I'm finished, I'm finished. I don't really think about it anymore. This has been a fun show to do because I hadn't shown the skulls in a while. And so that was work that was, from some time ago. And then there's also work like the moons, which I'm still working on. Like one goes out tomorrow night. And it's interesting to see the through line, but the resonance it has is, of course, very different. And I don't want to say means less, but it means different.
Great answer to a tough question. I was.
What's your student?
Yeah. Well, now, you're talking about how things are uncovered, things are found, and here's what Jung said about that. I took a look at it before we came here, and he says the way of getting at the fantasies, and the fantasies are our view of a unity of existence, is individually different. For many people, it is easiest to write them. Others visualize them, and others again draw and paint them, right? And he says, you keep doing it. Sometimes the hands alone can fantasy. They model or draw figures that are quite foreign to the consciousness, to the conscious. These exercises must be continued until the cramp in the conscious way of looking at things is released, or in other words, until one can let things happen. Which sounds an awful lot like that process you are describing.
It is. And I mean, you can see from the work that I'm a bit of a control freak as well. I'm building these very specific things. And yet there's something very freeing about it, where it's almost like my mind goes into neutral. Or it does when I feel like it does that when I do the good ones.
Right.
And this project, working with mandalas, actually really did dial me into Jung. I think there's a lot of wisdom there. Obviously, a lot of people have felt that way. Artists love him, but I feel that he really was dialing into something that is true in his perspective and in the way that people create things and work them.
Yeah. Bob, I was wondering about, this concept, well, I guess it's a concept of finding things, of releasing one's conscious effort. How do we do that? Yeah, how do we do that, Professor Thurman? How do we
try to let go?
How do we do that?
How do we strive to let go?
Yeah.
Well, that's a really good question. Again, I'm very stuck on the mandala behind your head, David K., in the sense that it's all the Theravada, what I call individual vehicle scriptures folded into that mandala there, And I was so excited when I visited Sri Lanka last time, the only time actually that I visited Sri Lanka, I was reading the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the great focus of mindfulness sutra, focuses of mindfulness sutra. And in reading that, he has a long list. The last things that you focus on when you practice that are the Four Noble Truths, and that's the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the freedom from suffering, and the truth of the path to the freedom from suffering. So then the third one, but then in the first one, and those are the last things that you focus your mindfulness on. And in the Theravada vision of Buddhahood, that was what he was thinking about, the last things he was thinking about before he became Buddha. And in the first Noble Truth, there's a long list of all kinds of fun things, pleasant and agreeable things. And they're listed in terms of the 6 senses, the 5 physical senses and the mental sense. And they're, pleasant and agreeable objects of the senses, a beautiful thing, a nice sweet sound, good smell, etc. And then the mental images of all of those things. And then he was saying, these are all suffering because they don't last. It's the suffering of change and so on. And that's the usual thing you think about when you think about dualistic Buddhism, where you have to escape from sense experience into some sort of null state. Nirvana conceived as a kind of null state, to be free, and freedom is a kind of blank space, So you have to get rid of that first Noble Truth. Then second one is the cause, which they really emphasize as craving, even more than ignorance. And why does that become, those pleasant things become suffering? Because they don't last, because you want them to last, and you crave them as you experience them, so that you're attached to them, in other words, as you experience them, and therefore you're dissatisfied and you're unhappy and disappointed when they don't last. They're not good enough for you, So you kind of strangle the pleasantness of them by your wish for them to be more than they are. So that's attachment, right? So then what I really was so shocked and delighted, because in the shorter mindfulness sutras, they don't have this ending. But in this one, then how do you consider the third Noble Truth, the Nirvana, truth of Nirvana, freedom from suffering, freedom, happiness, in other words, with no suffering, right? And it's the same list, because he says, where is this Nirvana thing, that is so important, that I've discovered, that I like, that I want to let you know about. And then he gives, where is it? It's in all the pleasant and agreeable things. It's all there. And he gives the same list, very pedantically, detail by detail, beautiful thing that you see, sweet sound that you hear, sweet smell that you smell, sweet taste that you taste, etc. Texture that you touch, and mental image of something that you enjoy. But then why is that nirvana? It was the same thing with suffering. No craving. You're not attached to it. So in fact, you just let it take you, and you'll be here now with it, and it is pleasant and agreeable, and it's free of suffering, and you're not thinking, you're content with it. You're not thinking, I want more of it, I want, it should be better, it's not good enough, another time it was better, or it could be better another way, etc. Your mind has let go of it. So how do you get there? Well, you get sick of grabbing onto what you have by wanting more and strangling your enjoyment of what it is, and you let it just happen, and you just be there with it, and you let go. And it's effortless, actually. Instead of struggling to make it more, you just let go of it. And this is beautifully expressed in Tantra, although that's a Theravada dualistic Buddhist thing. It's beautifully expressed in Tantra in that the Bodhisattva in the tantric bliss sort of sphere mandala, they as they're enjoying something, they're giving it away at the same time. So their generosity has become so great that the minute they enjoy whatever it is, they want everybody else to have it. So that's another way of letting go, is that as you're enjoying it, you just let it just go right through you to everybody else, And that's what artists have to do, right? You have to be a vessel. You have to sit there with your thing that's making the mandala, that's going around and around, and you have to you can't be attached to it. I'm here. Right? Is that right, David O?
That's very true. Yeah.
So then the same thing that was suffering because you wanted it more and more, and you were dissatisfied, becomes nirvana. When you just be there with it, let it take you rather than grab it for yourself. Something like that.
You know, and I was thinking about David, as you described your path to the mandala, it started with the skulls. And in this sutra that Bob is talking about, the way to get to letting go is by focusing on impermanence.
Oh yeah, that's
How
true.
interesting that you actually followed the sutric path in focusing on those skulls
Yeah.
and how that is so impermanent. And then you could release the craving because you realize, why crave? It's all going to disappear anyway. And there come the mandalas. So how wonderful is that?
That's really great.
You did me a solid by saying that.
Yeah. Yeah. Any
They say that,
questions?
David, that's why they say that the first level of real universal compassion, Bodhisattva's compassion, is paired with the wisdom of impermanence. And until there's the wisdom of impermanence, compassion is rather a sentimental thing that can be tiring and exhausting for the person, and they can feel dragged into somebody else's suffering, blah blah. So that's they get compassion fatigue and all this kind of thing. But when you know impermanence, because when you see suffering, you feel the other's suffering, and then you feel compassion for that. It's real compassion when you know that suffering of theirs can be brought to an end, and it can be replaced by happiness and freedom and release and relief. So your perception of it becomes a kind of relief for the other person. So that's real compassion. And that then, from that, the art of whatever healing art there is, we will naturally extend that to that person. So then it'll be real compassion.
Well, thank you.
That's very nice.
What I really like about what you just said about the path is that, there's that great quote, life must be lived forwards, but can only be understood backwards. That's when you make sense of things. Oh, that lines up with it. It hadn't actually occurred to me that would line up with the teaching.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So interesting. Now we have about 10 minutes left. So if anybody has a question for the artist himself, now is a good time.
There are no bad questions.
There are no bad
all
questions.
good.
They all lead to good places. Oh, good.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So this is from one of our online participants. It's for David O. Where does the motivation, inspiration, creation for art in general come from? Does it have an origin?
I would say it has changed. I think when I started making art, I wanted to create, as I mentioned to you earlier, I wanted to wait until I had something to say, and I desperately wanted to do it, and I really respected artists, but I wanted to wait until I felt like I had a little more substance to myself, and it was important to me, and I don't know what the origin is. That's a very hard question to answer. I mean, maybe it is finding, removing a veil and finding something like that. I would say my reasons for doing it have changed. I think I would say in the very beginning, I wanted to create things that hopefully people would marvel at and enjoy, and that would reflect well on me. And then the more I do it, the more it's made my life better. I have learned so much, about things that I never thought art would teach me. And the quality of my life has improved so much. And I mean, there's highlight experiences like this one right now where I'm able to talk with you two. There's also, moments where I actually find a bit of peace, and I find that I've lost time as I've been working on something, and that in this day and age, that's really worth something. And the kinds of dialogues that I have with people, it's opened me up quite a bit. And I would say actually, there's that cliche of the artist that becomes hermetic and doesn't talk to anybody. And with me, in a way, it's been the opposite. I feel like I've actually become more open.
Maybe just like Jung intended. It's really wonderful. Sorry.
I think here. Oh.
Hey, can you see me? So I look at all your pieces and I see that they're all made up of obviously different items. So I guess when you came across these items, or which came first, your concept, or did you just see the mandala in an object and think this must be a work that I now have to produce? Did it come to you or did you go to it?
That's actually a really great question. So what, I told the Tintern Abbey story where I was trying to represent something very large, and the feeling you got in a space by taking photographs of it. And then some of the first works I did were from a series called Libri, where I would photograph books and create forms out of them. And my feeling was, books can take you places. I wanted to make places out of books. But with the mandalas specifically, they came as I worked on them. I was going to do something where I was certainly going to reflect things and make them symmetrical, but I wasn't planning on making something that floated in space and that had its own internal structural logic to the extent that these do. And I would say that was part of the process. Again, as I always say, the first thing is to make sure that you get a photograph that captures the object. And with the moon, it's pretty easy. I mean, as long as you have it sharp and you've got it. With something like an ancient sutra or ancient text, or even a recent paperback, you need to find the qualities that make that object, that demonstrate that objectness, for lack of a better term, and repeat it. And I would also say that I had tried making mandala-like forms with paperback versions of books, like a Penguin special edition of the Bardo Todo or something like that. And they were beautiful, but there was something that was a little too perfect to answer the other person's question.
Would you cut them up and fold them?
No, I never do. I actually, that's not true. I chopped up a Dhammapada. I have to confess. But it was a Dover edition, so. But in general, I don't. And of course, with these ancient texts, there was going to be no folding, spindling, or mutilating.
Yeah, you wouldn't be here if there was. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
So I really made it. A lot of it is, you'd be surprised at how simple a lot of it is, where it's bending paper a certain way. It's finding the right angle that's compelling enough to stand on its own, and then repeating that. You can imagine when I first walked into a collection where they literally have climate control. They have texts. Some texts are over 1,000 years old, and they saw the end results that I was doing. There's no way you're gonna. And I actually had to take a piece of paper and bend it and take an iPhone photo and show right in front of them how you could make it seem as if it had been folded or dented or whatever, and it hadn't been.
Yeah.
And that was actually the key. And they didn't let me photograph the good stuff first.
Right.
They let me, photograph some things that, they had multiple copies of, and it became an evolutionary process. Did that answer your question? Good.
All right.
All right.
Okay, Jen, do we have any from online?
From the image ends up in this panel.
The medium itself, do you think? Or?
I guess the media of the pieces.
Okay.
So, and they were also wondering if you do any 3D pieces or if they're all 2D.
I have done some 3D pieces, actually. One of the things I like very much about these is that they're 2D that feel like 3D. I like that quality very much. And sometimes by making them 3D, I feel like it does it a disservice. But I'm always interested in that. I'm very interested in virtual reality as well. And the mediums are actually, the skulls were the first where I printed on aluminum. And I like the idea. One of the things that's interesting about living in Southern California is there's the spiritual traditions and all these different alternative views, esoteric ideas and things. And there's also the aerospace industry and car culture and all these other elements. And I'm a big Ferris fan, all those artists that came out of that particular gallery. And Larry Bell with his beautiful finishes, and Robert Irwin, who was so meticulous about creating, even the backs of his works were perfect. That kind of idea. And I wanted to create, work that had that kind of feel to it. And then I learned that aluminum actually is the third most common element in the earth. And I love that idea.
Wow.
The early photography was on metal plates, but also this element, it was here before us, it'll be here after us, which hopefully won't be too soon, but sometimes it feels like we're freight training towards that. It has this space age idea or this modern feel to it, and it's actually something quite ancient. So I love the idea of using that media for that. And then for the moons, I wanted to use something that had a very slight metallic component to it, so that there's a little bit of a shimmer to them.
Well, they're all magnificent. And so I think we're at the end, and many thanks to all of you who came.
Yeah, thank you.
And
all.
Bob, and most of all, and Beata, and everybody, Jen, and everyone who was running all this. Thank you.
Yeah,
And,
major shout out to Beata.
Thank you, David. Thank you, both Davids.
And
David O
Bob
and David
Thurman.
K.
Wow.
for
Yeah,
doing this
and,
wonderful
and
exhibit.
thank you, David. And but I think we're going on a freight train toward the heart of one of your mandalas, and a very wonderful place. So thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that's great.
That was great. Thank you.
It's great. That's so much fun.
Thank you. Thanks very much.